In the spring of 1945, a United States Army captain violated every regulation in the military handbook to save a woman who never asked to be saved. She had no documents, no voice, no memory of who she was. He gave her a false name and made her disappear into his unit. This is not a love story. This is not a tale of heroic rescue. This is a story about what happens when institutions systematically abandon the most vulnerable, and one man decides the rules matter less than a life. It is a story about power, agency, and the impossible choices war forces upon those who fight it and those who survive it. Northern Italy, April 28, 1945. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team advances through a mountain village whose name has been burned off every road sign. Smoke rises from collapsed stone houses, drifting through narrow streets that wind up the hillside. The German retreat left nothing but rubble and silence. No civilians emerge from cellars to greet the liberators. No white flags hang from windows. The village is a corpse, still warm, but already dead. Captain Henry Takeshi Yamada, 28 years old, commands a company of Nisei soldiers, men of Japanese descent fighting for a country that imprisoned their families behind barbed wire. His uniform is caked with dust from 3 days of continuous movement. His eyes are red-rimmed from lack of sleep. He has been in combat for 8 months, pushing north through Italy's mountains and valleys, watching friends die for territory that gets abandoned when new orders arrive. The 442nd has earned its reputation through blood and extraordinary sacrifice. They fought at Monte Cassino, where the ancient monastery was reduced to rubble. They fought at Anzio, where German artillery rained down for months on exposed positions. They broke through the Gothic line, a defensive position the Germans swore was impregnable. They rescued the lost battalion in the Vosges Mountains of France, suffering 800 casualties to save 211 Texan soldiers who had been surrounded by German forces. Every decoration, every commendation, every newspaper headline praising their courage is written in the blood of young men trying to prove they are American enough to deserve the freedom their families are denied. The regiment's motto is, "Go for broke," borrowed from Hawaiian pidgin slang meaning to risk everything on a single gamble. They have lived that motto through every engagement, taking casualties at rates higher than any other American unit because they cannot afford to fail. Yamada approaches what remains of a church. The structure dominates the village square, or what used to be a square before artillery reduced it to a crater surrounded by broken walls. The bell tower has been sheared in half by a direct hit, leaving the bronze bell visible inside hanging at an odd angle. The nave is open to the sky, exposing wooden pews tossed around like matchsticks. The air inside smells of plaster dust and something else, something organic and wrong. Death has a smell. Yamada has learned to recognize it. But this is old death, days or weeks past, not the fresh carnage of recent battle. Inside, among overturned pews and plaster dust that coats everything in ghostly white, something moves. A shape against the far wall. Human. Female. Alive. She sits with her back pressed against stone that was once part of the altar. A young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, though trauma has a way of aging faces beyond their years. Her dress is torn at the shoulder and stained dark brown. Blood that has dried days ago, maybe longer. The fabric hangs on her frame as if she has lost significant weight recently. Her hands rest palm up in her lap, as if waiting to receive something that will never come. Her eyes are open, but focused on nothing, staring through the reality in front of her to some other place where the mind goes when the present becomes unbearable. Her hair is matted with dirt and ash. Her feet are bare, covered in cuts that have scabbed over without proper care. She does not react to the sound of boots on stone. She does not turn her head when Yamada's shadow falls across her face. She exists in a space beyond sensory input, beyond the normal channels of human awareness. When Yamada steps closer, she does not flinch. She does not blink. She does not track his movement with her eyes. She breathes, but only barely, her chest rising and falling in shallow rhythms that seem insufficient to sustain life. There is no recognition in her expression. No fear, no hope, no anything. Corporal Robert Tanaka, the unit's medic, kneels beside her with the careful deliberation of someone approaching a wounded animal. He has treated hundreds of casualties during the Italian campaign. Shrapnel wounds, bullet wounds, burns, amputations, infections. But this is different. This is a wound that has no visible manifestation. He checks her pulse at the wrist, present, steady, slightly elevated. He examines her pupils with a pen light, watching them constrict normally in response to light. He runs his hands along her arms, looking for fractures, feels the back of her skull for contusions, checks her abdomen for signs of internal bleeding. After 2 minutes of methodical examination conducted in complete silence, he stands and turns to Yamada. The blood is not hers. Physically, she is unharmed. No broken bones, no wounds, no signs of recent injury that he can detect. She is malnourished and dehydrated, but not critically so. But she is somewhere else entirely, somewhere his medical training cannot reach. Tanaka has seen this before. Soldiers who survive artillery barrages that kill everyone around them. Men who walk away from destroyed bunkers without a scratch but never really walk away at all. The body continues. The mind evacuates. What remains is something in between. Yamada asks if she has spoken. Tanaka shakes his head. He tried Italian, tried German, tried gestures and simple demonstrations. He offered water, which she drank mechanically when the canteen was placed against her lips. He offered food, which she did not take. Nothing penetrates. She is present but absent, alive but unreachable, existing in some liminal space between consciousness and catatonia. Yamada crouches in front of her, studying her face. There is something familiar in her expression, or rather in the absence of expression. It reminds him of photographs his mother sent from Manzanar, portraits of internees staring at the camera with eyes that refused to engage, faces that had learned to become masks because showing emotion gave the guards something to mock or exploit. This woman has the same look, the same emptiness that is actually a form of protection. By 1945, more than 2 million people have been displaced across Italy. Allied bombing campaigns designed to destroy German supply lines have also destroyed the infrastructure that sustained civilian life. German scorched earth retreats have left entire regions without food, water, or shelter. Partisan warfare has turned villages into battlegrounds where the line between combatant and civilian has been deliberately erased. Refugees flood roads with whatever they can carry. Children on their backs, possessions in carts. Elderly parents supported between younger family members. They walk toward cities that may or may not have food, toward camps that may or may not have space, toward a future that is uncertain at best. But not everyone makes it to the roads. Some are left behind, too traumatized to move, too injured to walk, too invisible to bureaucratic systems designed for mass processing rather than individual need. Women without male relatives face particular danger in this chaos. Allied military protocols, written by men in offices far from the front lines, prioritize combatants and male civilians. The assumption, never stated explicitly but embedded in every regulation, is that men are the default category of humanity, and women are auxiliary to that primary concern. Men need housing, food, medical care, and documentation. Women need these things too, but the forms do not always have spaces for them. The systems were not designed with them in mind. Women traveling alone, especially those without identification papers, fall into a bureaucratic void where they exist without official recognition. The term used in military reports is unaccompanied displaced person. The practical reality is abandonment dressed in administrative language. They are ghosts in the machine, present but unrecorded, alive but not accounted for. Yamada receives his orders via radio from the divisional command post 15 kilometers south. The transmission crackles with static, the voice on the other end distorted but comprehensible. All unidentified civilians encountered during the advance are to be transported to Displaced Persons Camp number 47, located 30 kilometers south near Bologna. No exceptions. The Army is not equipped to handle individual cases. Processing centers will determine identity and repatriation eligibility. Transport trucks will arrive at 1600 hours to collect any civilians requiring evacuation. Yamada acknowledges the order with the standard response. Understood. Will comply. He signs off and stands in the ruined church, looking at the woman who does not look back, and he knows with absolute certainty what will happen if he follows those orders. He knows what DP Camp 47 looks like because he passed it during the advance north 2 weeks ago. The convoy stopped for fuel near the camp's perimeter, close enough that Yamada could see through the wire fencing. Thousands of people crammed into a former prisoner of war facility designed to hold 500. Tents erected in mud because there are not enough barracks. latrines overflowing because the sanitation system collapsed under the weight of numbers it was never meant to accommodate. One medical officer for every 2,000 refugees, and that medical officer has no supplies beyond basic bandages and morphine for the dying. Children with distended bellies from malnutrition. Old men sitting in the mud with vacant expressions. Women holding infants who cry without sound because they lack the energy for noise. The camps are not designed for rehabilitation. They are holding pens where people wait, sometimes for months, sometimes for years, for bureaucrats in offices hundreds of miles away to decide their fate based on paperwork that may or may not exist, on policies that change weekly, on quotas that bear no relation to human need. He also knows what happens to women in those camps, though this knowledge comes not from official reports, but from the conversations soldiers have when officers are not listening. The military police reports are classified, but soldiers talk. They talk about women who disappear from the camp manifests, present one day and gone the next with no record of transfer or release. They talk about exploitation by camp guards who control access to food, medicine, and information. They talk about trafficking networks that operate in the chaos, taking advantage of women who have no documentation, no family, no one to notice when they vanish. Sexual violence is so common, it does not merit official investigation unless the perpetrator is caught in the act, and the victim is coherent enough to provide testimony, and someone with authority decides it is worth pursuing. Most cases never reach that threshold. Most cases are invisible. They happen in shadows and are buried in silence because the women involved know that reporting means nothing will change, except that they will be marked as troublemakers. Yamada steps outside the church into afternoon light that feels too bright after the dim interior. The village square is empty except for his soldiers, who are methodically clearing buildings for remaining German stragglers or booby traps. They move with practiced efficiency, checking doorways, peering into cellars, marking cleared structures with chalk on exterior walls. Sergeant George Nakamura, 32 years old and second in command, is supervising the platoon with the efficient calm of someone who has done this in dozens of villages across hundreds of kilometers. He carries a clipboard with a checklist of structures to be searched. His uniform is cleaner than most because he is meticulous about washing whenever water is available. He believes that maintaining standards of appearance helps maintain standards of discipline, which helps keep men alive. Nakamura is from Hawaii, from a Japanese-American community that existed before internment became policy. His family was not forcibly relocated. Hawaii had too many Japanese residents to intern without crippling the economy, so most were left alone under martial law and intense surveillance. But Nakamura knows what Manzanar looks like because Yamada showed him photographs his mother smuggled out in letters, images of tar paper barracks and guard towers and faces pressed against barbed wire fences. The photos were a violation of camp regulations. If censors had caught them, Yamada's mother would have faced punishment. But she sent them anyway because she needed her son to know what was being done to his family in his absence. Yamada tells Nakamura about the woman in the church. Nakamura asks if she is injured. Yamada says no. Nakamura asks if she has identification. Yamada says no. Nakamura's expression shifts, subtle but unmistakable. He understands immediately what that means. If they follow orders, she goes to the camp. Once she enters the camp system without papers, she becomes a number on a roster, DP-047-3000 and something. If she cannot speak, cannot advocate for herself, cannot prove who she is or where she came from, she will remain in that system indefinitely, or until she disappears from the system entirely, which amounts to the same thing. Nakamura has seen the statistics that circulate among officers who pay attention to such things. Reports typed on thin paper and distributed in limited quantities, read once and then filed away. Displaced persons without documentation have a survival rate comparable to frontline infantry during active combat operations. They die from disease, malnutrition, violence, and despair at rates that are documented in reports no one reads and presented at meetings no one attends because the war is ending, and everyone wants to focus on victory rather than the messy consequences of that victory. Yamada makes a decision that will violate Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, failure to obey a lawful order, and Article 107, falsifying official documents. These are not minor infractions. These are offenses that result in court-martial, dishonorable discharge, and potential imprisonment. But Yamada makes the decision anyway because the alternative is unacceptable. He tells Nakamura they are not sending her to the camp. Nakamura asks what the alternative is. Yamada says they are taking her with them. As what? Nakamura asks. As a civilian auxiliary, Yamada says. An interpreter. Military regulations allow combat units to employ civilian auxiliaries in non-combat roles. Interpreters, guides, laborers, anyone whose knowledge or skills benefit the mission. The authorization process requires written requests, background verification, and approval from a field-grade officer. In practice, during active combat operations when units are moving rapidly and communication with higher headquarters is sporadic, documentation is often retroactive. Units acquire civilians out of necessity and formalize the paperwork later when there is time and someone remembers to do it. Yamada instructs Nakamura to create a personnel file. The woman's name will be Maria Rossi, the Italian equivalent of Jane Smith, generic enough to avoid scrutiny. Her role will be listed as auxiliary interpreter. Her date of hire will be backdated to April 15th, 2 weeks earlier, with fabricated paperwork indicating she was recruited in a southern village the regiment passed through during the advance. The village actually exists. American forces actually operated there. The lie is plausible because it is built on a foundation of truth. Nakamura objects strenuously. She has not spoken a single word. How is she interpreting anything? If anyone questions her, the entire deception collapses. Yamada will face court-martial. The 402nd Regimental Combat Team, the most decorated unit in United States military history, will be disgraced by a scandal involving document fraud. The reputation of the 442nd is not just a matter of pride. It is a shield that protects every Japanese-American family still imprisoned in camps. Every medal the regiment earns is an argument against the racism that justified internment. Every act of courage is evidence that Japanese Americans are loyal citizens who deserve freedom. A scandal would undermine that shield. It would give ammunition to the people who argue that Japanese Americans cannot be trusted. Yamada acknowledges the risk. Then he tells Nakamura about the letter he received last week from his mother in Manzanar. She described how the camp administration redesignated their barrack number without notice. For 3 days, her mail did not arrive. For 3 days, the family did not officially exist in the system. When she tried to file a complaint, the clerk told her that people without proper documentation should not expect proper treatment. Yamada's voice does not rise. He simply states the fact. If bureaucracy is powerful enough to erase his mother's existence for 3 days inside a camp surrounded by guards, bureaucracy can also create an existence for a woman who has none. The same system that dehumanizes can be used to protect. It is a weapon. He intends to use it. Nakamura asks what happens if she never speaks. Yamada says they will handle that when it happens. Right now, the choice is binary. Obey an order that condemns her, or disobey an order that saves her. There is no third option. Nakamura stares at him for a long moment. Then he nods and goes to create the paperwork. He is good at paperwork. He was an accountant before the war. He knows how to make numbers and names align in ways that satisfy audits. He will create Maria Rossi on paper, and she will be indistinguishable from any other civilian auxiliary employed by American forces in Italy during the spring of 1945. Yamada returns to the church. The woman has not moved. He kneels in front of her, careful not to touch her, careful not to crowd her space. He speaks slowly in the broken Italian he has learned during 8 months of combat in this country. His vocabulary is limited mostly to directions, questions about enemy positions, and reassurances that American soldiers are not there to harm civilians. It is a language of necessity, blunt and functional. He tells her his name, Henry Yamada, American soldier. He tells her she is safe. The Germans are gone. His men will not hurt her. He tells her she is coming with them. He does not ask if she wants to come. He does not ask if she understands. He simply informs her of what will happen next. She does not respond. Her eyes do not shift to meet his. But when he stands and gestures for her to follow, she rises. Mechanically, without hesitation, without will. She follows him out of the church like a shadow follows a body. This moment is the moral center of the entire story. Yamada has taken control of another human being's fate without her consent. He justifies it as protection. He believes it is the right thing to do. But intention does not erase the fact that he has removed her agency entirely. She did not ask to be saved. She is not capable of asking. And in that incapacity, he has made himself her custodian, her creator of identity, her determinant of future. There is no clear answer to whether this is heroism or control. Both exist simultaneously. He is saving her from a system that will devour her. He is also placing her into another system where she has no voice. The difference is that he believes his system is better. History will have to decide if he was right. The parallel is impossible to ignore. In 1942, the United States government issued Executive Order 9066, authorizing the forced removal of 120,000 Japanese Americans from the West Coast. Families were given 1 week to sell their homes, close their businesses, and report to assembly centers. They were not asked if they wanted to go. They were not consulted about where they would be sent. The government determined that their existence posed a threat, and bureaucracy made them disappear. Yamada's family lost everything. His father's fishing boat, sold for a fraction of its value. His mother's flower shop, closed and emptied. Their house in San Pedro, sold to cover debts. Everything that represented decades of work and sacrifice gone. They were transported to Manzanar, a camp built in the high desert of California, where temperatures reached 110 degrees in summer and dropped below freezing in winter. They lived in tar paper barracks with no insulation and no privacy. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. Searchlights swept the camp at night. Yamada enlisted in 1943 when the military finally allowed Nisei men to serve. He did it because he believed in proving loyalty. He did it because fighting felt better than sitting behind barbed wire. He did it because someone told him Japanese Americans had to earn their citizenship through blood, and that phrase lodged in his mind like shrapnel, painful and impossible to remove. Now he is using the same bureaucratic mechanisms that imprisoned his family to create a false identity for a woman who cannot consent. The irony is not lost on him, but he does it anyway. Because in this moment, bureaucracy is the only weapon he has against bureaucracy. Maria Rossi, the name that does not belong to her, joins the regiment. She is given a uniform jacket that hangs loose on her frame. She is assigned a position near the supply trucks, where her silence will be less conspicuous. Soldiers are instructed to refer to her as the interpreter, though no one has heard her interpret anything. The men of the 442nd do not ask questions. They are accustomed to operating in moral gray zones. They fight for a country that does not trust them. They risk their lives while their parents are imprisoned. One more irregularity in a war full of irregularities does not register as significant, but some of them watch her. Corporal Tanaka continues to check on her daily, offering food, offering water, offering medical attention she does not refuse but does not acknowledge. He treats her like a patient in extended care, monitoring vital signs, watching for deterioration or improvement. Private Daniel Sato, 19 years old and built like a middleweight boxer, begins walking near her whenever the regiment moves. He does not speak to her. He simply positions himself between her and potential threats. When other soldiers stare too long, Sato stares back until they look away. Sato is from Los Angeles, from a neighborhood that no longer exists because all the Japanese families were removed. His family is in Manzanar in the same block as Yamada's family. These connections matter. They create networks of obligation and loyalty that transcend military hierarchy. The regiment advances north toward the Po River. Germany has not yet officially surrendered, but the front is collapsing. Entire Wehrmacht divisions are retreating without engaging. The war in Italy is in its final days. The 432nd encounters minimal resistance. A few German stragglers too exhausted to fight. A roadblock abandoned before the Americans arrive. A sniper position evacuated hours earlier. Maria walks with the supply column. She does not speak. When ordered to stop, she stops. When ordered to move, she moves. At night, she sleeps sitting upright against supply crates, never lying down, never closing her eyes for more than a few minutes at a time. Tanaka describes it as hypervigilance, the body's refusal to fully rest because rest means vulnerability. Her nervous system is locked in survival mode, unable to recognize that immediate danger has passed. Soldiers begin calling her the ghost, not cruelly, not with mockery, simply as a descriptor. She moves through the regiment like something not entirely present. When you look directly at her, she is there. When you look away, you forget she exists. The regiment reaches a temporary base near Verona. Buildings that were once a textile factory have been converted into billets. For the first time in weeks, soldiers sleep indoors. Hot food is served from field kitchens. There is talk of redeployment. A personnel inspection is scheduled. All civilian auxiliaries must be accounted for. Yamada is summoned to meet with Major Richard Thompson, a West Point graduate and career officer responsible for administrative oversight. Thompson sits behind a desk made from stacked ammunition crates. He is 43 years old, gray at the temples, methodical in speech and thought. He has Maria Rossi's file in front of him. The file is thin, 2 pages of forms filled out in Nakamura's neat handwriting. He asks Yamada when she was hired. Yamada recites the fabricated date. Thompson asks what dialects she speaks. Yamada says Northern Italian, possibly some Venetian influence. Thompson asks for examples of her interpretation work. Yamada says she has been primarily used for civilian liaison in occupied villages. Thompson looks at him for a long time. Then he asks the question that will determine whether the entire deception collapses. Has she actually interpreted anything? Yamada does not lie. He recalibrates the truth. He explains that Maria Rossi survived a traumatic event. The specifics are unclear because she has difficulty discussing it. Her capacity for speech is inconsistent, but her presence has been valuable for putting female civilians at ease during village searches. Thompson closes the file. He tells Yamada that the military is not a rehabilitation center for traumatized civilians. If she cannot perform her duties, she should be transferred to a medical facility. Yamada argues that moving her now would result in her being lost in the system. Thompson says that is not their responsibility. The conversation ends without resolution. Thompson does not order Maria's removal, but he makes it clear that her status will be reviewed again, soon. That night, Maria speaks for the first time. It is a single word, shouted, as she recoils from a campfire. The word is in Italian, fuoco, fire. Her reaction is violent. She scrambles backward, colliding with a supply crate, her hands raised as if to shield her face. Tanaka approaches slowly, voice calm. He repeats that she is safe. The fire is controlled. It takes 10 minutes for her breathing to slow. She does not speak again, but the word remains, a fragment of memory breaking the surface. Later, Yamada sits with Tanaka and Nakamura. They discuss what the reaction might mean. Tanaka explains that trauma memory is not linear. It surfaces in sensory fragments. If Maria reacted to fire, something involving fire happened to her, something bad enough that her mind disassembled the memory to survive it. Between 1943 and 1945, German forces conducted systematic reprisal operations against Italian partisan groups. These operations did not distinguish between combatants and civilians. Entire villages suspected of harboring partisans were destroyed. Men were executed. Women and children were herded into churches or barns. The buildings were set on fire. Anyone who tried to escape was shot. The most documented of these massacres occurred in the Monte Sole region south of Bologna. Between September 29th and October 5th, 1944, the 16th SS Panzer Grenadier Division killed at least 770 civilians across multiple villages. The methodology was consistent. Soldiers would surround a village at dawn, separate men from women and children, execute the men, herd women and children into churches, pour gasoline, set fires, shoot anyone who tried to escape. Survivors were rare. Those who lived did so by hiding, under corpses in cellars, in the few structures the SS did not burn. Many survivors exhibited acute traumatic dissociation, the mind's emergency shutdown in the face of horrors it cannot process. Maria's reaction to fire suggests she survived something similar. Perhaps Monte Sole. Perhaps one of the dozens of smaller massacres that were never documented. May 8, 1945. Germany surrenders unconditionally. The war in Europe ends. Soldiers celebrate. Church bells ring across Italy. The 442nd receives official commendation. The unit will return to the United States as heroes, though their families remain imprisoned. But victory brings new complications. With combat operations concluded, administrative oversight intensifies. Personnel rosters must be finalized. Civilian auxiliaries must be processed. Records must be audited. Maria Rossi's file is flagged during a routine audit. There is no record of her employment prior to April 15th. The village listed as her place of recruitment has no documentation of American forces operating there on that date. Her lack of any interpretation work is noted. An official investigation is opened. Yamada is ordered to report to divisional headquarters. Thompson explains that if Maria Rossi's employment was legitimate, producing verification should be simple. If it was not, then someone falsified official records, which is a court-martial offense. Yamada is given 72 hours to provide corroborating evidence. He has none, because Maria Rossi does not exist. Before he can choose how to proceed, Maria makes the choice for him. She appears at Thompson's office without being summoned. No one knows how she learned about the investigation. Thompson asks if she is Maria Rossi. She nods. He asks if she speaks English. She responds in heavily accented but clear English that she does. Thompson tells her to sit. She remains standing. He asks her to state her full name for the record. She pauses. Then she says her name is not Maria Rossi. Her name is Elena Marchetti. She was born in Montefiore. She is 23 years old. She is the only surviving member of her family. Elena's testimony is fragmented but coherent. She describes her village. Her father was a partisan leader. Her mother ran a small farm. She had 2 younger brothers. In late September of 1944, German soldiers surrounded the village at dawn. They separated the men from the women. Elena's father and brothers were taken to the village square. She heard gunfire. Her mother tried to run. A soldier hit her with a rifle butt. Women and children were forced into the church. The doors were barred from outside. Elena could smell gasoline. She knew what was coming. There was a cellar entrance inside the church, hidden beneath a rug near the altar. She crawled toward it while other women screamed. She does not remember opening the trapdoor. She only remembers silence and fire. She does not know how long she stayed in the cellar. Days, maybe weeks. When she finally emerged, the village was gone. Every building reduced to blackened stone. No one left alive. She wandered. She hid from soldiers. She scavenged food. Eventually, she stopped moving. She sat in the remains of the church and waited for death. Instead, American soldiers found her. Thompson listens without interrupting. When Elena finishes, he asks why she did not speak sooner. She says she could not. The words were there, but they would not come out. She does not know why. She only knows that Captain Yamada saved her life, and if telling the truth saves his, then she will tell it. Thompson asks if Yamada instructed her to say this. She says no. Thompson asks if she wanted to be taken from the church. She pauses. Then she says she did not want anything. She was incapable of wanting. But if Yamada had not taken her, she would have been sent to a camp, and she would be dead. Thompson says he will verify her story. Elena says there is a priest, Padre Giovanni. He survived because he was visiting another village that day. He returned to find everyone dead. He buried the bodies. He kept a list of names. Verification takes 4 days. Padre Giovanni is located in a refugee center near Bologna. He is 67 years old. His hands shake when he writes his statement. He confirms that Elena Marchetti is the daughter of Carlo and Lucia Marchetti. He confirms that her brothers were named Matteo and Luca. He confirms that the entire family, except Elena, was killed during the SS reprisal operation. He confirms that Elena was presumed dead. Red Cross records corroborate the massacre. 770 confirmed dead. The SS unit responsible was the 16th Panzer Grenadier Division. War crimes investigations are ongoing. Elena Marchetti is officially recognized. Her identity is restored. She is issued documentation. She is no longer a bureaucratic ghost, but recognition does not resolve the question of Yamada's actions. He still falsified documents. He still violated military regulations. The fact that his intentions were humanitarian does not erase the illegality. Thompson submits his findings to the regimental commander. The recommendation is reprimand without court-martial. Yamada's actions violated protocol but resulted in no harm. Prosecution would serve no purpose and would damage morale. Yamada is formally reprimanded. A notation is placed in his service record. He will not be promoted, but he will not be court-martialed. He will return to the United States with his unit. Elena is offered multiple options: a position as an official interpreter, priority placement in a resettlement program, medical treatment, She declines all of these. Instead, she asks to be sent to a DP camp, not as an unidentified refugee, as a documented survivor with full paperwork. She wants to work with other displaced women. She wants to help them navigate the systems that nearly erased her. Yamada asks why. She says because being saved without consent is better than dying, but it is not the same as choosing to live. She needs to choose now. She needs to act with agency she was denied. Their final conversation happens outside headquarters. Yamada tells her he would do it again, even knowing she did not ask. He would make the same choice. Elena tells him she cannot thank him. Gratitude implies she wanted what he gave her. She did not want anything, but she is alive, and that matters. She asks him why he did it. He tells her about Manzanar, about watching his family be erased by bureaucracy, about deciding that if he had the power to manipulate those systems, he would use it. Elena asks if he thinks that makes him different from the people who imprisoned his family. He says no. It makes him the same. The only difference is intention, and intention is not enough, but it is all he had. She leaves the next morning. Yamada does not watch her go. He writes a letter to his wife. He tells her he tried to do something good. He does not know if he succeeded. He does not know if good actions performed through bad methods count as good. But he did it anyway. The historical record on violence against women in wartime Italy is extensive and horrifying. Research by historian Mary Louise Roberts documents that American soldiers committed approximately 60,000 sexual assaults against Italian women between 1943 and 1945. French colonial troops were responsible for mass rapes of thousands of women. German forces conducted systematic sexual violence as part of anti-partisan operations. But the violence was not only physical. The bureaucratic neglect of female refugees constituted its own form of violence. Women without documentation had survival rates comparable to soldiers in combat. They died from starvation, exposure, disease, and violence at rates that were documented but not addressed. The military prioritized men. Women were secondary. Women were afterthoughts. Thousands of women survived the war only to die in post-war chaos because no system was designed to protect them. Thousands more survived but were trafficked, exploited, or forced into prostitution. The neglect was not accidental. It was structural. It was policy. Elena worked with displaced persons camps across northern Italy between 1945 and 1948. She assisted female refugees in obtaining documentation, navigating repatriation processes, and accessing medical care. She became fluent in English, French, and German to serve as an interpreter, a real one this time. In 1949, she testified at war crimes trials in Nuremberg as a witness to the Monetization massacre. Her testimony contributed to the conviction of 3 SS officers. In 1952, she helped establish a women's cooperative in Bologna that provided housing and employment for female survivors of wartime violence. The cooperative still exists today. She never married. When journalists asked her about this in a 1968 interview, she said she had no interest in belonging to anyone after spending years fighting to belong to herself. She was asked about Captain Yamada. She said he was not her hero. Heroes ask permission. He was a man who made an impossible choice when the right choice did not exist. She did not forgive him because there was nothing to forgive. She did not thank him because gratitude was not the appropriate response. She acknowledged him. That was all. Yamada and Elena exchanged letters twice. Once in 1946, when he wrote to tell her his family had been released from Manzanar and that he was struggling to reconcile his service with what had been done to them. She responded that reconciliation might not be possible. Some contradictions cannot be resolved. They can only be survived. The second exchange was in 1968. Yamada was 51 years old, working as a high school teacher in Los Angeles. He read about Elena's cooperative in an Italian-American newspaper. He wrote to congratulate her. She wrote back to say that what he did in 1945 was still wrong, and it was still necessary. And those two truths would never stop being true simultaneously. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team returned to the United States in 1946. The unit received 7 Presidential Unit citations, 21 Medals of Honor, and more than 18,000 individual decorations. It remains the most decorated unit in American military history. The men who served in it fought with extraordinary courage for a country that questioned their loyalty. Their families were released from internment camps throughout 1945 and 1946. Many returned to homes that had been vandalized or seized. Businesses were gone. Property was sold for fractions of its value. The government eventually issued reparations, $20,000 per family, in 1988, more than 4 decades after the injustice. No amount of money could compensate for what was taken. The question at the center of this story does not have an answer. Can a decision made without consent still be just? Can removing someone's agency be an act of preservation? Can good intentions justify bad methods? Elena Marchetti would say no. Yamada's actions saved her life but denied her autonomy. The denial was necessary, but necessity does not equal morality. She lived because he chose for her. That makes her survival conditional on his power. And power, even when used protectively, is still power. Henry Yamada would say he does not know. He made the choice he believed was right in the moment. He would make it again. But he would never claim it was unambiguously correct. Morality in war is not about right versus wrong. It is about bad versus worse. He chose the option that seemed less harmful. That is all anyone can do. History would say both are correct. The structural neglect of women in wartime was policy. The Allied military, like all militaries, treated women as peripheral to the real business of war. When women suffered, it was unfortunate but inevitable. When women died, it was collateral damage. The systems were designed to ignore them. In that context, individual acts of intervention, even flawed ones, even coercive ones, were the only alternative to systematic abandonment. Yamada was not heroic. He was desperate. And desperation is often the only force powerful enough to challenge indifference. The lesson is not that Yamada was right. The lesson is that he should never have been placed in a position where such a choice was necessary. If institutions had protected Elena Marchetti, Yamada would not have needed to violate regulations to save her. If military protocols prioritized civilian women's safety, she could have received care without requiring an individual soldier to risk his career. The failure was not Yamada's. The failure was the system that forced him to choose between obedience and conscience. The failure was a military structure that treated female refugees as administrative inconveniences. The failure was a post-war order that planned for reconstruction of cities but not for protection of the people who lived in them. Negligence is violence. When institutions refuse to act, they are not neutral. They are complicit. And the burden of correcting that complicity falls on individuals who were never supposed to bear it. Elena Marchetti died in Bologna in 2003 at the age of 81. Her obituary in Italian newspapers described her as a survivor, an advocate, and a woman who refused to let trauma define her. More than 200 women attended her funeral. Women she had helped, women she had mentored, women who existed because she had fought for systems to recognize their existence. Henry Yamada died in Los Angeles in 2007 at the age of 90. His obituary mentioned his service with the 442nd, his career as an educator, and his lifelong advocacy for Japanese American redress. It did not mention Elena Marchetti. That story remained private until his family donated his letters to a military history archive in 2012. Historians who reviewed the correspondence noted the moral complexity. Some argued Yamada's actions were paternalistic and represented the same colonial attitudes that justified the internment of Japanese Americans. Others argued he operated within the only framework available to him, and that judging his choices from a position of safety in hindsight was intellectually dishonest. Both arguments are valid. That is the point. There is no clean resolution. There is only the fact that a woman who should have died did not. And the reason she did not die is that someone with power chose to use it on her behalf. And that choice was simultaneously an act of salvation and an exercise of control. War creates impossible situations. It forces people into roles they are not equipped to fill. It demands decisions that have no right answer. And then it asks them to live with the consequences. Elena Marchetti lived with the consequence of surviving when everyone she loved did not. She lived with the consequence of being saved by someone who never asked if she wanted to be saved. She built a life from those consequences. Not a happy life necessarily, not an easy life, but a life that mattered, a life that saved others. Henry Yamada lived with the consequence of violating the principles he believed in to achieve an outcome he believed was necessary. He lived with the knowledge that he controlled another person's fate without her consent. He lived with the question of whether that made him different from the people who controlled his family's fate. He never answered that question. He simply continued trying to do better. If there is a lesson, it is this: systems matter more than individuals. Yamada's intervention saved one woman, but structures that neglect vulnerable populations create millions of situations where individual intervention is the only alternative to death. Fixing those structures matters more than celebrating the individuals who navigate around them. Elena Marchetti understood this. That is why she dedicated her post-war life to institutional advocacy rather than individual rescue. She did not try to save women one by one. She fought to change the systems that endangered them. She pushed for policies that protected female refugees. She documented the structural failures that caused their suffering. She demanded accountability from governments and military organizations that preferred to forget. That work mattered more than Yamada's single act. It prevented thousands of women from needing a Captain Yamada to save them. It created systems where women could save themselves. This is not a love story. This is not a hero story. This is a story about what happens when institutions fail and individuals are left to make choices that should never be theirs to make. It is a story about the limits of good intentions. It is a story about agency and the loss of agency and the fight to reclaim it. It is a story about a woman who had no name, no home, and no place to go, until someone took her without asking, and she survived. And survival was enough, until it was not, until she made survival into something more, into a life, into purpose, into resistance against the systems that tried to erase her. It is a story about negligence as policy, about how wars are fought by men who are remembered and endured by women who are forgotten, about how history celebrates soldiers and ignores the people they saved, about how saving someone is not the same as giving them freedom. Northern Italy, 1945. A woman sits in the ruins of a church. She has no documents, no voice, no future. An American captain finds her. He decides she will not disappear. He creates a name for her. He pulls her into his world without asking if she wants to enter it. Years later, she will say he was wrong to do it, and she will say she is alive because he did. Both statements will be true, and the tension between those truths will never resolve. That tension is the story, not the rescue, not the survival. The unresolvable question of whether good actions performed through coercive methods count as good. The answer is uncomfortable. It is yes and no. It is always yes and no. And the women who survived those years carry that discomfort in their bones. They owe their lives to systems that failed them, and individuals who controlled them, and luck that had nothing to do with justice. They rebuilt their lives from that foundation, and they did it without the gratitude the world demanded. Because gratitude implies choice, and they never had that. This is their story. The women who had no names, who were saved without being asked, who survived and then fought for the right to define what survival meant, who refused to let their erasure be the final word. They existed, they mattered, and history will remember them, not as victims, not as the rescued, as the ones who took broken survival and forged it into defiant life.